best thing to do these days of mine. These days of mine.
Welcome to God's Open. I'm your host, Christopher Fisher, and today we have on the line Jeremy and Joel. How's everyone doing tonight?
Doing good, Chris.
Hanging in there, doing all right. Thanks, Chris.
Fantastic. And so this is a panel on raising children. I think we all have a little bit of experience with that, I guess a little bit. So why don't we go ahead and introduce ourselves and then talk about our level of parenting experience. Jeremy, do you want to start?
Well, sure, Chris. Yeah, my name's Jeremy. I live up in Canada, about an hour and a half east of Vancouver, in a city called Chilliwack. I have three grown kids. My oldest is 23. She's married now. I have a son that's 21, and my youngest daughter just turned 19. So they're all great kids. I think we certainly didn't parent perfectly, but we did a lot of things right, and they're all serving God and are really well-grounded kids or young adults now, and we not only love them, we like them.
Joel?
That's great. I love that you said you not only love them, but you like them. And my kids, we've got 4 kids, my wife and I. Our oldest is almost 15. I've got a 12-year-old, a 10-year-old, and an 8-year-old. They go boy, girl, boy, girl. And no more babies in the house, no more toddlers. And it's true, you do love all of your kids at all times, but there are seasons and times when you like certain ones more than others. But generally, we really like our kids. We have what we think is a pretty stable, fun family. Lots of fun conversations. And I don't know, it's being a parent is overwhelming and awesome at the same time.
Yep.
Fantastic. Well, I'm Christopher Fisher, and I got 7 kids, and they're all under 14. And the oldest are twins at age 14, and the youngest is just a year old. So when we first decided to start having kids, I explained to my wife, that it's less work if you start with multiples. If you start with twins, you got some sort of economic benefit for raising 2 at once. So that's why we decided to start with twins. It was a great idea because twins are fun and they play with each other, and it takes less work as a parent. So I got all my good babies, and I don't know what you're talking about. Seasons of time where you don't like your kids. I don't have experience with that. I just love my babies. They're good babies.
You can edit that part out in a live video, right?
Yeah,
That's how this works, right? Yeah.
Absolutely. So I guess we got our first comment, spanking those babies. And so it was funny. I was at work and I was talking to this female coworker, and I said, my babies love spankings. And she's like, what are you talking about? I'm like, if I call up my daughter right now and ask her if she wants a spanking, she'll say yes. So she's like, no, she won't. So I call her up and say, hey, Rain baby, you want a spanking? And she's like, yes. And my coworker was just flabbergasted because, my babies are pretty good. They don't get any real spankings. So any spankings they do get is like playful spankings, which contrasted to my sister. So I do very little spankings for my kids. It's always on the table, spankings. But my sister, she at least used to do a lot of spankings, a lot of times. And my dad commented, he noticed that I give very little spankings. She gave a lot of spankings, but both of our kids are just very well behaved, all our broods. He said the only common denominator there is genetics. It's the grandpa. And so I think there might be something to that kids might have some sort of genetic predisposition to certain behavioral characteristics. Any input? Joel? Nothing?
Yeah, sure. I'll weigh in on that. Every kid has been different. Some kids have responded to that type of discipline more than others. Some would need it repeatedly. Some responded not at all. Every kid's different is what our experience has been. Some would need just one little pop on the butt and they would never do it again. Some, the threat of a spanking was like, who cares?
So when my oldest daughter was really young, she learned how to climb out of her crib. And so I was like, I can't be doing this, dealing with her climbing out of her crib when we're supposed to be going to sleep. So I would give her a spanking. And there was one night she climbed out of her crib so many times. The spanking just was not a deterrent. I was like, okay, I give up. You win, daughter. And then from then on, what I started doing was when I go to bed, I'd bring her with me, and then I would struggle cuddle, and she'd wear herself out trying to get up, and then she'd just fall asleep, and we just co-slept from then on. And that was a lot easier than any corporal punishment, and it saved us a lot of time and headache. So yeah, each kid is unique. Some kids, all I have to do is use a stern voice to, and they'll fold. My little girls, I got a 3-year-old and a 5-year-old. It's having birthdays, so it's like, I don't know, doing some math here, but they're very sensitive. So just a stern voice will bring them to the point of tears. And so no spanking's necessary typically. Jeremy, did you have any success or non-success with corporal or
I
non-corporal?
was actually wondering if you guys noticed if your younger kids had if you had to spank them less or not at all than your older kids. Did you find that? Have you found that at all? We did. And it was almost like the older kids were warning the younger kids, "Oh, don't do that, because this is what'll happen," right? So it was
Yeah, definitely. The threat is always on the table. Even in their older days, it's like, if you don't want to listen to me, I can give you a spanking. They'll be like, okay, yeah, I'll listen to you. And so
I think
make
that's
sure.
a good point, Jeremy. The older ones sometimes will try and talk some sense into the younger ones and say, look, just trust mom and daddy. They're telling you the truth. Do what they say. Whereas you're right, the older ones didn't get that. Sometimes I've wondered if we just spanked the younger ones less because they were the babies and you're just kind of tired of dealing with it after the years. But I think you're actually right. The older ones have learned a little and the younger ones want to follow and be like the older ones. So maybe there's something to that.
And
Yeah.
it could be that the younger ones get less spankings because parents mellow out as they have
Mhm.
more kids.
Mhm.
Because it's like, oh, is it really worth it right now? Is this the best solution? Whereas a new parent might be very frustrated and to not know how to react and how to deal with those kids. And so it might be a gut instinct reaction where it's not necessary. A lot of times when these kids are crying or whiny, they really just need to go to bed. So if my daughter's whining, it's like, I could tell it's tiredness. Why don't you come here to this couch and you lay down and you just lay there? And she'll go lay there and she'll be mad that she's laying there, but she doesn't want to get up because then she'll get the spanking and she'll just fall asleep and then she'll wake up and she'll be better.
Yeah, I think on that point too, it's important to if you're spanking, never to do it out of frustration or anger. You got to let yourself calm down and then do it out of love for a purpose. And I think that is really important when you're going to engage in that kind of discipline. And it's often not easy, but I think it's important to take that step back and calm yourself if you're really frustrated, and then deal with it.
Yeah, so there is a book that I would recommend everyone reading, and it's called Selfish Reasons to Have More Kids. And it's by economist Brian Kaplan, and he goes over reasons why we should have more kids, all things considered. He's an economist. But part of that book is about corporal punishment. Corporal punishment does lead to immediate behavioral corrections, but it's a short-term behavioral correction. A lot of times in the long term, it doesn't stick as well as you would hope it to. And so that's how I use it. Not that I spank my kids within the last year, even probably not. But it's for short-term solutions to problem. If I hear whining upstairs, I'll go upstairs and I'll be like, "Hey, are you whining?" I won't use that voice to say, "Are you whining?" And the kid will just instantly, the whining is cut off in our household, because that's actually one of our 2 rules. Number 1 is no whining, and number 2 is no mullets. And so Joel's kids are violating that right now. But very minimal rules, just no whining. I need a peaceful household. I'm not going to tolerate a crazy, chaotic household.
Well, you got 7 kids, so that is probably a good way to play it. I think when you have less kids, that's less of an issue.
Absolutely. So on that idea of books that maybe helped us, I know someone in the Facebook chat said, "What are some books that have helped us become good parents?" I skipped all those. What to expect when you're expecting, and what to expect when you're toddlers. I didn't read any of those. I did read one book called "To Train Up a Child," which was by Michael and Debbie Pearl. It's a book that's banned in England because it's all about spanking, and England doesn't like spanking. But that book might be useful for certain temperaments of children. A lot of times, these parenting books pretend that all children are the same, equal, with the same temperaments, and respond to the same carrots and sticks, which is not true at all. There's wide variation in how kids act and how kids behave. I also taught Sunday school for 6-year-olds for like 7 years, and so I have exposure to a wide range of temperaments within children. That children are not the same; they're not cookie cutter. People who are parents who say, "Hey, this is the de facto way to raise your children." I don't give them any credit whatsoever because it doesn't account for the wide diversity that you encounter within children.
Go ahead, Joel.
Oh, we've read that book too. In fact, it helped us figure out how to deal with the temperamental toddler when we had our first child. And you're thrown into it and you're drowning as a new parent. You don't know how to deal with this little person with a will that seems unbreakable. And that was a really good book. It gave some structure, some practical tools. I think it was very reasonable. I think, Michael and Debbie Pearl, not everybody agrees with them or loves everything about them, but they've had a lot of kids. And, I remember the number one thing he said is the most important thing in any difficult disciplinary thing with your child is win. And, you've got to win, and it's different for every child, but they have to know that you're the winner. And at the end of the day, they're going to obey you. But they did spend a lot of time talking about, staying in control, not losing it. And anyways, all that to say, I remember it being a beneficial book at the time. But honestly, I would love to say I've read a whole bunch of parenting books, but I just haven't. I think you kind of learn as you go. But it's funny that you brought that one up. I thought it was all right.
Yeah, some of the things did not work for me at all. Like set a trap for your kids and be ready to pounce once they act on that trap. That did not work in my experience. One of their other things is like teach your kids to fear water by pushing them in the water. Don't do that. Don't do that. Water is really dangerous, and my kids have a natural fear of water, well justified, and so I don't think I need to teach them that fear. Irenic writes, I found it easy to discipline my children without anger as a result of not appreciating the anger that accompanied the punishment my father melted out. Yeah, one thing that in the book, Selfish Reasons to Have More Kids, one thing that really sticks with children is not necessarily all the long-term ideas you teach them, not necessarily all the football lessons or karate or anything like that, but what sticks with them is a strong sense of what you are like with them. So their long-term memories, positive or negative of you, is a long-lasting effect. And you don't want to create this long-lasting hatred of father or something like that, where you're associated with all these negative feelings and rage and anger. You don't want to do that. That will stick with them. They'll remember it. They will become bitter. You don't want to do it.
Yeah, I think one of the books probably one of the only books on parenting that we read, both my wife and I read, and we got on the same page. But it's kind of before the discipline thing even comes. Well, it is kind of a discipline, but it was called Baby Wise. I don't know if any of you guys read the book Baby Wise, but it's all about teaching your kids how to sleep right from when they come out of the womb. And I think it was probably the best book. And if I recommend a book to new parents, it's always that one. they don't know how to sleep when they come out of the womb. They've had their eyes closed for 9 months. They don't know when it's daytime or nighttime, and you have to teach them. And it was all about scheduling your kid, not letting the kid schedule you. And it was super helpful. I recommend it to anybody that's like asks this very question. Get that book, read it before you have the child, or if you've just had a newborn. I thought it was probably it was brilliant.
That sounds like a good idea. I was always an advocate of cry it out, which is the idea that
Mhm.
you just leave the kid in the room and let them cry at night until they fall asleep. My wife was not. And so we compromised, and the compromise was she takes care of them at night, and I just ignore them.
Well, that's one of the points in that book was the cry it out strategy. And you check in on them once in a while just to make sure they haven't strangled themselves in the bars of the crib or something. And if they're okay, you just let them go. And it's harder. It is way harder for the women to do that than the men. It's easier for us to do it.
Hey, Chris, my wife she actually can overhear this. She's off camera working on something, and she waited and said, "Hey, we probably wouldn't recommend the Michael Pearl book anymore." But,
well,
so I haven't read a parenting book since then, but at the time it was useful. But she did weigh in with another title, if I could share that.
Yes, go for it.
All right. She said another one she really liked, and I trust my wife, I haven't read it, but I'd take her recommendation, was Loving Our Kids on Purpose by Danny Silk. And she said it's good for preschoolers and teens. So throwing that one out there.
Yeah, so I would not recommend people buy that Daniel Pearl book and then implement it 100%. You read it with a grain of salt and you say, okay, these are the strategies that worked for him in that particular circumstances. There's things I could take from that and human behavioral concepts that are useful, but don't just point or just don't across the board implement that on your own children. I would not suggest it. I would suggest lenience, very few rules, and the rules that matter, those ones are enforced. Like the no whining rule. I don't want a house with whining. Do I care if my kids stay up super late? No, I don't care at all about that. I'm not going to spend my time enforcing something that I don't have the will to enforce, but I really do care about the whining one. So I'm going to enforce that. So that's one of the things that maybe we could talk about, parental strategies. And myself, I'm more of a free range parent. The kids, I got a 1-year-old running the house, and I got one of those 4-door fridges, and he'll open the bottom drawer and pull out like a yogurt for himself at like 1. And my 3-year-olds are getting themselves food, and they're just kind of self-sufficient. So I may basically cook dinner like once a day for myself, and I'll cook extra for them. And then they kind of scavenge for themselves during the day or whenever my wife decides to cook. I don't know. It's kind of like a free range house. There's very little structure. We don't force the kids into certain patterns or behaviors, certain time frames or schedules. Although that's out the window, it's just not worth my time to enforce. Jeremy, how about your girls? How did you raise them, and how did they turn out from your parenting structure?
Well, I think they turned out really well. We didn't coddle them, and I wouldn't classify us as helicopter parents by any stretch of the imagination. But we did have structure, and we did. We were. I would say we're maybe on the opposite end of the structure from you, Chris. I think we structured our activities fairly well and fairly regularly. I think in some ways that helps build some. Just trying to think of the word. Not a boundary, but a comfort level of expectation, if that makes any sense. And we, bedtime was at a certain time, and they went to bed whether they wanted to or not. But that was so we did schedule quite a bit more, and I think that was probably a result of that Baby Wise book that we had in it. And for us, man, I'm telling you, it worked really well. Our kids slept through the night right from 4 or 5 weeks old. onward, we never got up with them. It was really well done. So that was good, and we enjoyed that part of our child rearing kind of stuff. But yeah, they turned out great. We had them in karate at young age. We taught them, there was a lot of, I think, a lot of activities that taught self-discipline, and I think karate was a huge one. All our kids were in karate, including mom and dad too, and that really, I think that helped develop their character a lot too.
Yeah. How about Joel? Are you free range or are you structured?
Free range or structured? Well, you learn as you go, as you know, when you have a bunch of kids. Jeremy, I missed, how many kids did you say you had?
3.
You have 3. Okay, I've got 4, and Chris has like 13.
Yeah.
That's what people say, right? But more. But I mean, our structure, I guess the way we've kind of gone about it is our structure depends on the kid, and the level of structure required is often based upon the level of responsibility that they show us they can have. So maybe we say, hey, it's time to go to bed at 8:30, but hey, I want to stay up and read long, in bed with the book light. They love to read at bedtime. Okay, well, you can read a little later, but are you going to still get up when we say to? Or are you going to turn off the light when we say to? And not picking every little hill to die on. I said it has to be, this is more me. I'm actually probably wanting more structure than my wife. She's probably a little more free range. But I'll find myself saying, the kids need to go to bed at this time. Or I said, no, you can't do that. And then when I really stop and think about it, I don't really have a good reason why they shouldn't do that. And I have to go, okay, well, this kid can be responsible. There's not really a good reason for them to do this or not do this. Let me see what they'll do with that. It's funny, you brought up the kids getting into the fridge. My younger son, when he was like 3, he's just the one who will get into anything. He's 10 now, but at the time, he's the kid that would get into anything. We'd get up in the morning, he'd have every pot and pan out. He'd have my wife's purse emptied out. He'd take apart something mechanical if he could do it. And he wasn't destructive or violent. It was just like, I want to see what's inside this and mess with it. Well, he discovered how to get the fridge open. So every morning we'd go in there and he'd be helping himself to whatever he wants. So we literally found like this cable lock, and we adhered it with like industrial grade adhesive to the door and the fridge, and we had a special combination on it. We had to literally cable lock my toddler out of the fridge, and the combination was actually his birthday, ironically. But anyways, I mean, he needed a lot of structure because he wouldn't take no for an answer and stay out of stuff, but other kids would. So I don't know if that answers your question, but
yeah. Irenic asks, can you address boundaries we might place before our children? My rules are fairly simple. No whining, no mullets, and basically whatever I say in the moment, they need to listen to. And so a lot of times I will do structured lessons for them. So Mondays, typically we go over current events or basic economics, things like that. We watched Ukraine Under Fire on Monday. Excellent thing. So I had to quiz my children throughout that, make sure that they're understanding it. And of course, my children now understand Ukraine and Russia better than most public school teachers, which is great. And so Tuesday nights, it's a family movie night where we watch culturally relevant movies that are alluded to in popular culture. And then typically on Friday nights, we do history night, go over historical events. And Sundays, of course, we do church. And on the way to and from church, we do like audio books. So I took them through a 20-hour Andrew Jackson book. So they're experts now on Andrew Jackson and Hernan Cortez. And so we did 2 audiobooks so far since we moved here, and church is 30 minutes away. So there is some structure, and if I call them up to do an event or say, hey, kids, come here, I do expect them to respond immediately to me and listen to me in the moment. If I come home and I'm the cleanest person in the house, my wife does not have my tendency to like a clean house. And so if I come home and say, hey, we're cleaning the house, everyone needs to drop what they're doing and clean their house based on the moment. And so basically those 3 things: no whining, no mullets, and just listen in the moment. And so I guess that's my boundaries. If they're ignoring me, if they're showing attitude to me, that type of stuff's unacceptable. I'll shut that down in the moment. Be like, you gotta lose that expression. You gotta shape up. What are you doing here? And attitude correction in the moment. So those are basic boundaries that I place before my children. You got anything to add, anyone? Jeremy, boundaries,
Yeah,
girls.
I would totally agree with you on the boundaries thing. That was, attitude was always nipped in the bud right away when it was unacceptable. And I think, you know, immediate correction. I mean, that's one of God's principles of justice. So it's important to nip it in the bud right away. I think as kids got older, in their teens and stuff, we talked about the purpose of dating and all that kind of stuff, especially with the girls. And they weren't. Our boundary was there's no dating in high school because there's no point. Have as many guy friends as you want, but there's no dating and there's no intimate relationships in high school. And that was you can start those when you finish high school if you like, and I think that worked also well for us. Um, so those were some of our boundaries. We didn't have a ton of them. Like we weren't. When I say we were structured, we weren't legalistic or anything like that. And like to Joel's point, I mean, if there was something going on at night and which required a later bedtime or whatever, we're fine with that. We weren't dogmatic about it, but we were certainly reasonable about it. But those structures were in place, so that makes sense.
David writes, I taught kids not to rat each other out. That's actually another good lesson. You don't want to be in a situation like Soviet Russia where the kids are informing on the parents to the government or anything like that. They need to understand the value of familial bonds, of being true to your family above all else. And I do try to teach them that lesson that our loyalty is to one another. Our loyalty is not to the government, not to the state, not to our friends. It needs to be first and foremost to family. Joel, how about boundaries for you and your kids?
Boundaries. I don't know, our family is unique in some ways. One is that we homeschool, and another way to add to that is that we work from home. We also have a fairly small home. The two boys share a room. The two girls share a room. So we're really, really aware of what our kids are involved in. Our computers, like I'm on one computer now. There's 3 computers behind me on that wall, but the 3 computers behind me on that wall are facing the doorway that points towards the common, social area in the house. That door stays open. My kids don't get on my computer unless these other 3 computers are full because it's the screen you can't see when you walk down the hall. There's a lot of accountability for screens. My kids I've got one that's a teen and one that's almost a teen. The oldest is a boy. And so there's a lot of boundaries with that, but we're also around each other a lot. And we have I would say a very strong awareness and a great involvement in our kids' lives. I make it a point to check up on my oldest from time to time and say, hey, how are you doing with this? And I've been really encouraged lately, and I've been acting on this to just say, how are you doing with this temptation? How are you doing with this area in your life? How are things with God? And just check up once in a while and just say, hey, do you appreciate me keeping you accountable? Do you appreciate me checking up on you? And he says, yeah, I appreciate it. I said, okay, well, I will from time to time. So expect that. And we just make a very deliberate effort to stay involved in our kids' lives, spend time with each one of them, and we're around each other a lot. And I understand that's not everybody's family situation. Not everybody can spend that much time together. But I find that we don't have to have a lot of really rigid rules to protect our kids. A lot of it just comes from the day in, day out, being aware, being involved, asking questions, keeping our relationship friendly. Not that I'm trying to be their friend first and foremost. We want to be their parent, but we are friends with our kids and they do trust us. And I think if we maintain a level of friendship and trust between us and them, they stay open with us and they share with us what's going on. And they know that if they've got an issue or something, they've come across something that's concerning to them or confusing to them, they're going to come to us first over their peers, and certainly over, whatever the world would say. But we don't really have to crack the whip an awful lot, thankfully. We also have some pretty chill kids. I'm really blessed with some pretty easygoing kids. I don't think I could handle ones that weren't. But anyways, I hope that answers your question, if that helps out.
Yeah. So next question is, Chris, what's your motivation for free range tendency? My motivation is laziness. I don't like to do a lot of work, and so it's easier not to. But the good thing is that science works out on my behalf. So if you go read the book that I recommended earlier, Selfish Reasons to Have More Kids, this is an economist that wrote it. The idea is this, that we overinvest in our kids. And to the extent we overinvest, the real value of kids is cheaper than we're putting into it. The real cost of kids is cheaper than we're putting into it. And so if kids actually take less parenting, we should be willing to have more kids. If all our overexerting ourselves it can be backed away from. And so it goes into a lot of statistics with fraternal twins and identical twins and genetic effects and environmental effects and unique environmental effects. And what the science finds is that genetic effects very much predict kids' long-term happiness, financial ability, and health. Even adopted kids more resemble in those areas their biological parents than they do their adopted parents, which means the parenting effects that we think are very strong are not quite as strong as we'd think. And of course, this is about the normal range of parenting. So it's not about like abusive parents. It's like the normal people who would raise a kid who's adopted, and they're putting their love and time into that. And then you can look at identical twin and fraternal twin studies, and you could look at how similar those various twins are to each other. And then you could actually figure out, because identical twins share 100% of their DNA, and fraternal twins are just like normal siblings and share 50% of their DNA. You could look for the genetic effects and see how that plays out in these kids raised in the same environment. And genetics has a huge factor for those long-term outcomes. Even identical twins that are raised apart that actually turn out to be more alike than identical twins raised together. And I guess the reasoning there is, I got identical twins. Maybe one twin wants to stand out from the other, so they might go and do something a different way to distinguish him from his brother. But I've seen specials in the news. I don't know if you've seen anything like this, where like identical twins who are split up at birth, they come together and they start going over what their life is like, and it's eerily similar, like using the same type of toothpaste and driving the same type of car, things like that. And so if genetics plays a major role in kids' long-term happiness and behavior and just their general outcome of life, then we could really back away from some of this tiger parent stuff, forcing your kid to play piano for 15 hours a day. I don't know, just something hyperbolic like that. Like it's very little benefit from that, and a lot of time wasted. I mean, I don't play piano. I don't enjoy piano. And so I'm not going to force my kid, who also might not like piano. Let's say it's soccer. That's probably more relatable. Me putting my twins into soccer, it didn't turn out very well. They were like on-field cheerleaders. They're just not the aggressive type. And if it's just using a bunch of my time and they're not gaining any benefit from it, and I'm not gaining any benefit from that, it can be cut out of our schedules, and we just have that much more free time to do other things that we do like. That doesn't mean that I make them do nothing that I don't think that there's value to. Again, I take them through the history lessons. I take them through politics and current events. We go through the Bible. I give them what I think is going to give them long-term informational value that they can draw on once they get out in the real world and they're interacting with people who maybe want to corrupt them. Global homo wants to turn our kids gay, wants to turn them into mindless consumers of media, just parroting anything the corporations want. I need them to fight against that. So that's when I'm focusing my dedicated instruction towards, fighting these cultural tendencies, a pro-God approach, an anti-humanist approach, anti-global homo. So I hope that makes sense. That yeah, a lot of our parental activities just don't have the long-term outcomes that we think so. There's also a Minnesota IQ study that shows fade out effects based on different categories of adopted kids. Yeah, you could study for an IQ test, but those IQs, they gradually go back to an average or a medium. IQ is very much a genetically based factor that you can't ingrain into someone. It's sad to say. I mean, we all like to imagine that we're blank sheets and cookie cutters from birth, and people just aren't born inferior in athletics or inferior in IQ, but that's just not the case. Some people are born with genetic predispositions to certain advantages, like height. I happen to be 6'2". My wife is almost 6 foot. I don't know how big she is, but I just posted on Facebook. I think there's this short men just have it hard. They can't find ladies. They can't. They don't on average earn as much as tall guys. That's just the way of the world. People like tall people. They look down on short guys, and I feel bad for the short guys, but that's what we have to deal with in life. All right, thoughts on my big huge rant there?
Well, I think you're absolutely right. Every kid is different, and they are all have their predispositions to certain things and aversions to others. And I think a key as a parent is to identify and really make a concerted effort to figure out where your kids' strengths are and what turns their light bulb on and what turns it off, and you know, try and facilitate that growth in those areas that they're strong in. And it might not be you, and it might not be what you want for your kid, and that's, I think, a huge danger that parents fall into. It's a huge trap. Somehow, some parents, they certainly want to live vicariously through their kids' lives because they didn't get to do something as a kid, and I think that's extremely selfish and can be harmful. So that's one of the things we did. We figured out what their strengths were. Two of them, it was music. One of them, it was art. And all of them were really good in sports. But we didn't do every sport, and we chose the sports that were going to be least intrusive on family life. We didn't put them in hockey because we weren't prepared to get up at 4:30 in the morning and take them to hockey practice. And we didn't like the environment, frankly, of the hockey parents. And I know myself, and I thought, I don't think I would function well in that environment. So I think we're gonna stay out of that one. And so we put them in other things. But yeah.
So one thing in the Brian Kaplan selfish reason to have more kids, there are certain aspects that parents have a huge effect on, and one is religious affiliation. Kids most often identify with the religion of their parents. That doesn't affect their religiosity, and so it's not a long-term effect on church attendance, for example, is one metric. Certain people are more predisposed to going to church, and some are not. And so parents don't have a very big effect on that. But what they identify for a religion, parents do have a huge effect on. And the other thing that I thought was very interesting that parents have a huge effect on is the age at which females first have sexual relationships. And so boys, boys, we probably understand boys kind of do what they want, and boys are more impulsive, and boys typically younger in life don't have the edge on sexual monopoly in the first place. But parental effects on females in their first sexual encounter, it was like 7 years having of difference between a parent who's involved in teaching the daughter those values. And so that actually gives me hope. Teaching my daughters to remain chaste and virtuous, I think is a winning game, something we can win. Whereas the boys, yeah, maybe, maybe not. Joel, any thoughts?
I feel like he covered like a million things. Something that stood out there to me was the importance of teaching your kids to think for themselves. Not to rag on public school, but I guess I'm going to do it a little bit. Sometimes the impression I get is that, I mean, I was public K through 12, so I can speak from my own experience, but you're kind of taught, at least I was taught, how to pass a test. So the state, pays your district the funding. That was the impression I got. Like, you've spent half the year learning to pass a test, but you never really learn how to think or how to, do logic or be philosophical or recognize thought patterns or certainly a fallacy, anything like that. But one of the things we do in our family is, and I want to actually plug a book. I want to have my wife go grab this book, but this is a book I recommend for any parent to go through. You got me in this little tiny rectangle here. There we go. It's called The Fallacy Detective by Bludorn, I think is the author. Of course, it's a couple homeschool brothers who wrote the book, but it's a hilarious book, and it's how to recognize street fallacies, informal logic. And you'll have a lot of fun going through it with your kids. I don't get any profit off the book. It's just a great book. We've been through it a few times and I learned a lot from it. But what happens are two things when you start to teach your kids to think philosophically and recognize how to think critically, recognize fallacies, to understand the tricks people are using on you when they communicate. Two things happen. Number one, they start to spot the thinking in advertisements and in worldly messages, just messages that they're going to encounter. The other thing that happens is they start to point out all the fallacies that you use when you argue with your children. And that's a huge drawback, but it's actually kind of fun too. I'll say, hey, pick up this or don't do that thing. And they go, too okay. You do that too, Daddy. I'm like, okay, thanks. But
No. That would be them using the fallacy.
Oh yeah, you're right. Here it shows that I can't think about it on the fly here, but
they would be the something's bad, whether or not you yourself do it. But
go ahead. You're gonna.
Yeah, public school is not meant to create free-thinking children. It's meant to bring them into conformity with what the state thinks an obedient citizen will be like. Like, for example, in public schools, they stream CNN. They stream CNN, and it's just propaganda to force people into certain worldviews. Their goal is not to make people who challenge the system. They're challenging the system is everything that's authorized already by the system is what they call challenging the system. It's about societal control. The modern public school system is a brainchild of John Dewey, who is a socialist, and that's his goal, to take immigrant children and turn them into obedient citizens that work in the corporate machine. And by and large, it's done a very good job of not teaching people how to think. You see that with the mask mandates, with the vaccines, with the war in Ukraine. People are just consumers. They consume and eat up what's been fed to them by this media. They don't look at the media that's being censored. They don't look at opposing thoughts and ideas. It's not a critical evaluation of the system. And Can
I say one more thing? Building off what Jeremy said, and I really like this. You talked about emphasizing your individual children's strengths. You said something along those lines, like finding what they're good at. For instance, my first child, he is prodigious intellectually in many areas. He was winning chess tournaments at 4, against high school kids in our area. It was really hilarious. It was kind of weird. He was like a local chess celebrity, but my second child isn't like that. My third child's totally different. My fourth child's totally different. And what we realize is every child is an individual, and not all of them are as book smart or as IQ smart as the next, but they are all intelligent, and they have, I think, the workings of genius in every individual, but they have different intelligences. And so the first child, if he has a great interest in math, we give him math. If he has great interest in chess, we let him learn chess. We invest in him in that way. But if my second child is artistic and she has a great sense of aesthetic things, we let her focus on those things. They don't force them into things they have no interest in. I mean, they've got to learn to read, write, and do math and like be social and, get some exercise. But where you see the genius and intelligence in each individual, you focus on that and you feed that, and it develops the individual. And that's something that public school is not going to do for you. Not that public school parents can't do that with their children, but that's one of the great things we've learned, is recognizing each child as an individual and they all have their own level of intelligence to cater to.
Yeah, I think we started our kids in a private Christian school for their elementary school years, and it was a good school. It was a good place to for their formative years. But then we really recognized how legalistic it was getting, especially into the high school years, and we pulled them out of the private Christian school for that reason and economic reasons, and we put them into public school. And recognizing the fact that um, now that we've put them into public school, we're going to be we need to be even more engaged in what they're learning, and keeping the lines of communication open, and that kind of thing. And we really did make a concerted effort to do that. But I'm telling you right now, if I was having kids right now, I don't think there's any way I could put my kids into public school right now in this environment. Not where we are. It's it's an evil place.
Yeah, absolutely. If anyone's having kids now, try to homeschool if at all possible. And so I was dating a girl once back in the day, back in my younger days, and she pointed out to me that the studies show, of course, homeschoolers do way better than private schoolers and public schoolers on all standardized tests. But she pointed out to me, but that could be reversing correlation and causation if we think the homeschooling is what's making them smarter. It tends to be, in fact, that smarter people tend to homeschool their kids, and smarter people have smarter kids. And I said, yeah, that's actually probably true. So the benefit is not they're going to be smarter. You're probably smarter if you're homeschooling them, but the benefit is that you insulate them from a lot of this worldliness. I think it's like 1 in 5 girls are now identifying as LGTGBQ or whatever, because women are especially susceptible to social pressure, social conformity, wanting to be it, and they're very attention seeking as well. And so this offers this LGBTQ thing offers them a chance to say, "Oh, look at me! I'm so special. I'm unique. Give the focus to me," and it draws them into this worldview. Women are tend to be particularly susceptible to this type of social pressure or social conformity.
Yeah, I think you're right, and I think, but one of the things you have to be careful of is when you insulate your kids from the world, you can, or the potential is there anyway, to forget about how to teach them to navigate through the world. And I'm not saying this is in any of your guys' case, and I would imagine it's completely the opposite with you guys. Um, just hearing how engaged you are and what you're teaching them, but I think there's a propensity to want to protect your kids from the world and forgetting about how to teach them to navigate through it. And I think one of the benefits that, if there was a benefit for sending the kids to public school when they hit their high school years, was what we really were able to walk, or help teach them how to walk through that type of environment, because that's the environment they're going to end up in the workforce, or wherever they end up. And so it was a good thing in a lot of ways, and then it was bad in a lot of ways, because of the environment they were in. But I think they're all pretty well adjusted now, and they got their heads screwed on straight, and they understand the evil that's around them. So it was. I think that's one of the cautionary pieces that I would see, because I part of my career was involved in recruiting, and I would often interview kids from homeschool environments and Christian school environments. And one of the things we dug into was their background. It was a security related industry. So we dug into their backgrounds, and often, I can't tell you how many times, it was countless. The kids that were from the homeschool environments and the Christian school environments had the worst experiences post high school in terms of the things that they had done, because they didn't know how to control themselves in the world. They didn't know how. They were bombarded with all this worldly stuff, and they just didn't know how to navigate through it. So they joined it, and they ended up making a lot of mistakes in their life, and some things that cost them a career in the area that they were looking for. So it that was it was quite eye opening for me as a person in that position.
James writes, "Be careful homeschooling. Your kids might think for themselves." And yeah, and so um, I was able to, with remote learning, listen into some of the conversations with these public school teachers, and it's like, oh, Trump is bad and evil, things like that. Like this is what they try to teach at public schools. It's indoctrination. It's teachers' private opinions, and so being able to train your kids to point that out, to understand what's happening, and able to respond to that, I think is pretty critical. And I do agree with this. They need some experience. So me growing up, my big conflict was mostly with like Calvinists throughout high school, dealing with just countless Calvinists left and right, and interacting with these supposed Christians who would attack me from all angles. I remember once I was at it was Summit Ministries, which was in Colorado, for teaching kids about the Bible. I'm just surrounded by people. There's like 15 people, and I'm in the middle of this circle, and they're all screaming at me, just their different points about open theism or whatever. And yeah, those experiences in which I'm thrust into the fire, I think, are helpful. It's helpful for understanding how the world works and how the world operates and how people think and how they react, and what their motivations are. Their motivations are not always pure for the way they argue and what they argue. And it's good to be able to spot those characteristics within people. That's why I also, with my kids, try to go over things like body language and temperament, and trying to ascertain what people are telling you implicitly, as opposed to explicitly, being able to understand where people are coming from. If you read a news story, who's talking, what are they trying to convince you of, what angle are they portraying, and what aren't they telling you? Because a lot of times the news is not just what are they telling you, but what are they not telling you? So if the news is only showing you dead bodies from Russian attacks, and not showing you Azov battalions executing civilians who are leaving Ukrainian cities because they want the civilians to stay to increase civilian body count for international attention, they're going to show you those Russian casualties and not the Ukrainian casualties, because they have a narrative. They're trying to sell you on a narrative. They want you believing a specific thing. And so I do think it's very important to go over with your kids just human nature and how humans act and operate, and what kind of propaganda. Show what's the Cernovich movie, which he talks about news propaganda. Go show them the Cernovich movies. It goes over. It's actually interesting. In that movie, they go over Plato's allegory of the cave within that movie, and apply it to news propaganda. But teach them these things so that they can start spotting this and operate in the world, and not fall prey to this information warfare that we see all around us. I'm going to have to go find that movie. Joel, any thoughts?
What are you asking at this point? I feel like we bounced all over there.
Yeah, I was. So Hoaxed is the movie I was talking about. And
Okay.
then there's also The Plot Against the President, which are two movies that I did show my kids, which jump into media propaganda. How do you fight against the information warfare that you see coming at your kids?
I don't know. If I see a commercial or a political ad, and I think it's interesting, I'll sit the kids down and we'll be like, "Hey, let's watch this. What did you think of that? What did he say? What's the case he's making? But notice the music, notice the lighting, notice this, the way they're dressed. Look at the way this guy is. There's a lot that goes into visual media, a lot. Something I tell people and I tell my kids is, if it's on a screen, if you see it on a screen, it's fake. It's already fake. You're not looking at reality. Right now, you're not looking at us. Anybody watching this video, they're not looking at us. They're looking at, can you hear me? Okay,
Yes, we can hear you.
It said my video popped out.
Yeah.
Proof that it's not me. But I make media for a living. That's what I've done for almost 2 decades. So I've thought a lot about what is it I'm actually creating and how is it affecting people? You know, I've always predominantly made stuff that sells a product or a service. But I draw my kids into my thinking on all of that and try to speak from my area of expertise to say, here's how media manipulates people. Here's how it manipulates minds. And we can do it for good reasons, to sell a product or a service. But a lot of the media today is not like that. It's highly controlling, it's highly influential, and it's done by people who know exactly what they're doing. So I talk to my kids about questioning not just the production of the media, but the minds behind the media. You know, the news media, the TV shows, commercials, they don't just come from nowhere. They come from the minds of companies, but those companies are made of individual people, and those individual people have goals, motivations, and philosophies that drive them. So what's the motivation of the person who's producing the media? What are they getting from my attention that I invest in whatever they're showing me? It's not always just to sell me something like a car. It's to move me as part of humanity in a certain direction. And I think if my kids are at least aware of that, as crazy as that sounds to some people, if they're at least aware of that that's the way the world communicates and influences us as Western consumers, with television, media, just 24/7 at our disposal, I think I'm doing them a great benefit to teach them to think for themselves, to see through the media presentation, so that they can, I don't know, it's good to be cautiously skeptical, at the very least, about what's going on today. I don't want to think 1984 is coming to pass in my lifetime, but I've read enough of those books. I don't know, are we fulfilling it? Or do these guys see something? Were these guys secular prophets that saw something coming? The Rod Serlings, Ray Bradbury's, and George Orwell's.
George, he actually fought for the communists in the Spanish Civil War, and then walked away disenchanted with the communist movement because of the mass media propaganda. One of his famous quotes is like, I saw news reports that had the reverse of reality and just wholly fabricating things that never happened. He was just astounded at the level of war propaganda at that time. But when we're talking about lenses and framing, I am reminded of a very famous case. I think it was in Texas. It was about billboards. And the judge said, oh, pictures do not lie. And so he says, the people who think that the billboards are cluttering this space and we shouldn't add more billboards, you bring us pictures. And the people who think that it's not very cluttered, you guys bring us pictures, and we'll just look at the pictures and we'll decide whether it's too cluttered or not. And so one side went a long way away, and they used a longer lens, and using a longer lens took all the billboards and basically compacted them together. And so it looked like a huge mess of billboards. Whereas the other person, they went very close with a short millimeter lens and took pictures, and it showed billboards that were very spread apart in a lot of open space. And the judge, that he looked at both sets of pictures and he threw them down in disgust. He's like, I can't believe anyone. I can't trust anything anyone tells me, not even pictures. The pictures are lying because the pictures are a frame of reference. But I think that does go to show you that is one of my main goals, again, with raising my children, so that they could critically evaluate propaganda as they see it and be able to ascertain who's trying to sell them what. Because guess what? If someone's not trying to sell you something, you're the product. Who's trying to convince you of what and why? And the worst thing that could happen would be my kids buying into this massive propaganda and becoming one of these people in this system. And so that's my goal, especially for my girls, not to have them join popular culture, anti-humanist, I'll call them. Jeremy seems like he did pretty good with his girls. He's got a married daughter and one going off to college, and so there's hope for us all, right, Jeremy?
Absolutely, Chris. Yeah, you bet. And you guys, you both of you have. I mean, yeah, I really admire you guys start because you started on the whole critical thinking thing with your kids earlier than I did, and I waited too late. They still turned out great, and they still um, they're able to critical think now. But I started a little bit too late, and I think I'm probably just lucky, or God was watching over us and protecting them. Um, that they didn't get more um, fooled and led down the wrong path with respect to some of those things. So good on you guys for starting early, because I think that's really important. And if I had to do it all over again, I would definitely start way earlier than I did. And but yeah,
So with that being said, I would not expect the perfect parent to bat 100%. Again, kids are individuals. They're not moldable lumps of clay that you could just turn them into anything you want. Again, I talked about the major role that genetics play in how kids behave and how kids think and how kids turn out. And so people are just not moldable lumps. This is one of the things that socialism and that modern culture gets very wrong. They think if you flip the right switches, people are going to listen. People are going to behave. You could mold them and force them into your perfect system. People are not perfect. People will turn wayward. Even the best raised child might turn out bad, and it's not going to be the parent's fault in that case. Yes, bad parenting can and probably leads to those bad outcomes than good parenting, but I would not expect good parents to bat 100% and have their kids always turn out perfectly. Kids are their own people. So, all right, let's see if we got any other questions. I got my article pulled up on even homosexuality, and so one thing that the book that I talked about goes over is one indicator is homosexuality. It doesn't talk about it that much, so I pulled up the statistics and I ran my own analysis on is homosexuality genetic, and it turns out that there's only about a 20% correlation if one identical twin is a homosexual that the second one also is. And so not even that is genetically based. And the unique environment, which you could probably equate to free will, makes up about 20% of what it takes for the outcome. 60% environmental effect. And so, yeah, there is some genetic component to it, but overall, free will is probably a better explanation of those behavioral activities. Anyways, Joel, any other thoughts?
Well, we had a visit there. My kids came in and decided they wanted to.
I saw that. I was like, this is an inopportune time. Oh, I guess you're not listening in because you got the headphones.
No,
on?
they can't hear.
Okay, this is awkward.
No, that's funny. I mean, we talk about those words with our kids, and we talk about them pretty frankly and openly about sex and homosexuality and trans this and that and whatever they're going to see on the Skittles bag at Walmart about transsexual, activism. It's literally on the Skittles bag. I mean, so we just talk about it. We say, well, this is what it is. This is what the Bible says. This is what's real. This is what you're going to face. Sorry.
No, I do think that's a good policy. Don't shield them from the world. Talk to them about the world. Show them what the world believes, what the world thinks, or else they're going to get it from someone else.
Yeah. Earlier, Chris, you used the word insulated, and that's a word that I use. We live in a pretty conservative part of the country in East Texas. We're out of the liberal Dallas area. It's extremely, especially the community we're in, is extremely Christian. I mean, it's very faith-based. And so our kids are growing up in this little bubble. But you use the word insulated. It's a very homeschool friendly community, but sometimes homeschoolers come under the criticism of being sheltering the kids. And I'm like, no, we don't shelter them. We insulate them. It's exactly right. Like, our kids have the rest of their life to face all the evils of the world and all the pressures of the world. But for these years, I can go alongside them and say, hey, these are the things you're going to be exposed to. This is what the world is like, and provide some perspective for them. and not just throw them out there. But I mean, yeah, my kids came in. You didn't say anything they hadn't heard before. Needless to say, I had the headphones on. They're not hearing. But I figured we're talking about parenting, so my kids could, photobomb the frame, and that'd be totally fine. So I don't know. That's all I have to say there.
No, that's good. I love babies. Anytime I see my babies, I'm always happy to see them, give them hugs. When I'm away from them, I miss them. I have a good life. I have good kids. And I guess if there's any single men that are listening to this, my biggest piece of advice is find a woman who's mild-mannered, level-headed, and go look at her mom. Go check out her mom, because more often than not, you're not marrying a woman, you're marrying her mom. And as her mom is, so shall your future wife be. If she has a messy house, your house is probably going to be messy. If she's bigger, your wife might be bigger. It's not 100%, but a good rule of thumb is you're marrying the person's mom. That's who that person's going to turn into. And so if you want well-behaved, good children, find a level-headed, mild-mannered woman. And level-headed, mild-mannered women are probably going to have mild-mannered, level-headed children, in my experience. Don't get one of those manic pixie girls. They're going to have a crazy life. And one of my subordinates, he's like, you know what happened? I was in the Navy, and I had this crazy wife. And while I was gone, she went and cheated on me with my brother, and then blew all my bank account on cocaine. He's like, that's not even my worst ex-wife. It's like, he had kids with her. I'm like, oh no. And then of course his kids turned out a little bit crazy, but not as crazy as the mom. But I would filter out the manic pixie dream girls, no matter how. Here's the really sad part about life and about children, is that men are magnetically drawn to self-destructive toxic women, and women are magnetically drawn to self-destructive toxic men. It seems to be a thing. So maybe there's something to this arranged marriage stuff that they used to do. Joel, how about your kids? Arranged marriages? Which daughter do you want to arrange?
I can't talk about that because one of them's sitting in the background on the computer right now. But yeah, arranged marriage. I mean, you grow up thinking that doesn't sound very good, but as you get to be a little older, and my oldest is almost 15, and my daughter's going to be 13, it's like I'm not thinking about arranging anything, but I'm very careful with who their close friends are. I mean, it's not like I've got certain prospects, but I know a type of young lady I would hope my son would want to marry. I have a type of young man that I hope my daughters would be interested in. And I want to kind of keep them away, weed out the ones I wouldn't want them hanging out with. But I mean, Jeremy could probably speak more to that. His kids are a little bit older.
Yeah, my oldest daughter, she got married 3 years ago. And so she was 19 when she got married, or 20. So probably a little bit younger than we would have liked or preferred, in our perfect world of thinking. But we had absolutely no reservations with this guy, because, I mean, he came in, stand-up guy. He came up to me privately before he even asked my daughter to date him, and asked my permission to date my daughter, because he thought that my daughter would be someone that he might want to marry. Well, that was pretty cool. And so, he had my blessing right from the start, because he had godly intentions for that relationship. And my youngest daughter was just in a relationship, her first relationship, and she realized that even though they had been good friends for a couple of years, and they started dating, that he wasn't the guy. And before it continued much further, she broke it off. So whatever we've done, I think, we probably taught them the right things about relationships, and the proper way to go about it. And so far so good. My son hasn't dated a girl yet. Not interested right now. He's, and frankly, probably a good idea. and because he's not ready to settle down. He doesn't want to. So
Of
yeah.
course, my philosophy is always the younger the better, because one of my, I guess, operating fundamental principles in life is if we don't do something now, we'll never do it. And
Mhm.
so it's like, when am I going to go backpack Europe? I was getting out of college. If I don't do it now, I'll do it never. So I went and did that. My kid, when my oldest son had cancer, and Make a Wish was trying to get him to go to Disneyland. That's what they really like to sell, because they have deals with Disneyland and it's real cheap for them. He eventually picked Iceland, but I told him it's like, we could go to Disneyland anytime. Pick something that we can't do just anytime. And so he picked to go to Iceland, which was a fantastic choice for his Make-A-Wish. And so since I said we could go anytime to Disneyland, I was like, okay, I said we could go anytime, we'll go now. So I took them on a road trip around the western part of the US. I don't know if it's Disneyland or Disney World in California, but that's the one we went to, California. And we got that knocked out of the way. If you need to operate on that. If you don't do it now, then you're never going to do it. And these people who are like, well, I'm going to wait till I'm 30 to have kids. It's like, is that going to work out for you? Is it very, very often, this is another point made in Brian Kaplan's Selfish Reasons to Have More Kids, is that you don't tend to have buyer's remorse. Even single moms, as terrible as that may sound, none of these single moms are like, oh, I wish I didn't have my daughter or son. There's very little buyer's remorse, even if it's not in perfect circumstances. But there is a lot of non-buyer's remorse, where there's these old, bitter women like, I was promised the world, that I could have my career and family too, and then it just doesn't work out for them. And you see them just posting the hugest amounts of cope on Twitter, where it's like, I'm happy with my 40-year-old childless life. Here's me in this flashy, flamboyant outfit. I'm loving life. It's like, I don't think you love life. I think you're full of regrets. It feels very sad what's going on here. Of course, not all. Hashtag not all. Different people have different personalities, but by and large, there's a lot more non-buyer's remorse than there is buyer's remorse. People don't regret having the kids that they have. So having kids earlier rather than later is something I do support.
Yeah, I think excuse me. I think when you try and orchestrate your life according to a certain plan, God has other plans, and I think you have to be sensitive to His leading in your life, and I think yeah, don't try and get your way. Try and see it God's way. If it's early, it's early. If it's late, it's late. I didn't get married until I was 29.
Now you're not a grandpa yet, are you?
No.
Oh, okay. Are you pressing for that to be
No,
a grandpa?
No, I said you guys should wait at least 5 years.
Oh, okay.
Enjoy
Sooner
your
is
marriage.
better than later.
Enjoy your and get to know, get to establish your relationship, and don't be in a hurry. That's what I told them. And if that happens, it happens. Great, but yeah, I'm not in any hurry. I'm not old enough to be a grandpa yet, so I'm fine with it.
I'll weigh in, Chris. In growing up, I only have one brother, and my wife only has one sister. So we come from a family with two kids each. And so when we got married, we assumed we'd have at least two kids. In my mind, I could only imagine having ever had two until we had more. But my wife thought two, maybe three. Well, sure enough, pretty quickly we had three, and then we had four. And before you know it, it's like I'm drowning in this lifestyle I have zero experience with, and there were the sleepless nights with the newborns and the little babies. And that was the single hardest thing for me. But I absolutely love every one of my kids. And from the day they were born, actually from the day we found out we were pregnant with them, I would never not want them. Number 4 came a little sooner than we expected. She was a little bit of a surprise, but she is the most amazing child. And I love her to death, and I wouldn't have it any other way. I wanted to share this as I'm here live on the internet, and they know full well. They walked in and they wrote me a note with some Pizza Hut coupons. and a letter begging to buy Pizza Hut tonight. And they slipped that in real discreetly, even though I told them I'd be live on the internet. I'll probably have to reward their daringness with some Pizza Hut.
Probably they do. Pizza Hut has like that 5 deal where you spend $5 or $6.
I don't know what are these.
I can feed.
These are terrible coupons. These are really expensive, but
I can feed my whole family for $30 at Pizza Hut, and everyone's happy. And so I do like Pizza Hut.
They did say we could do Little Caesars. That's in the fine print there. So maybe we'll do Little Caesars because it's cheap.
Oh man.
I don't know.
So Treebeard says boys can afford to wait, not so much for girls. Yeah, I would generally agree with that. That older women get, the harder it is for them to become pregnant.
One thing I'll add, just, I don't know how long we're going here today, but I would say the one thing I would strongly remind parents to do is, right from conception, pray for your kids. Spend a lot of time in prayer. I used to go into my kids' rooms when they were sleeping and kneel down beside their bed and just pray for their lives in every aspect. And I think that's undervalued, and I don't think we recognize the power sometimes of what that can do for their lives. And really, I look at them and how they have developed as adults, and it's him, really, at the end of the day.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, my oldest son had the cancer, and there was a lot of prayers for him. So it really feels like he wasn't in a low risk cancer either. He was in an elevated risk, and it seems to have paid off. He's been off his cancer treatments for over 5 years now, and so life is going good. And I think our prayers were effectual, that God listened to and heard our prayers. And so I always pray for my kids. My consistent prayer is that they have long, healthy, and happy lives.
Right.
I don't want them burning out in a blaze of glory, going to fight some sort of war, anything like that. Let's get this.
But even praying for their spouses, that God would at the right time bring the right person into their lives. And not that I'm certainly not of the opinion that he knows who that person is when they're born, but you know what I'm saying? Like, I'm not that, at the right time, that he would just bring somebody into their lives that would be the perfect fit for them.
Yeah. Instead of sending my girls to college, I'm just going to have them waitress next to a med school. I could help the process along. But talking about how happy we are to have kids, I tell everyone that the day I found out I was having twins was the best day of my life, because that's the day I got a triple kill on Battlefield 2 with a grenade launcher. My wife's like, I wish you did not get that triple kill on the same day you found out she's like, you always tell that. It's terrible. Absolutely awful. Yeah. Like when I'm in the store with my kids, people will be like, oh, are all these kids yours? And I say, well, I think so, but my wife keeps throwing away all my home paternity test kits. So I don't know. But that's good. I can't imagine life with less kids. Sometimes when I count my kids up, it feels like I'm missing some of my kids. It's like, I think there should be more. They're just not. It feels like we're missing someone. And having kids is wonderful. It's a great experience. And having kids sooner rather than later is my advice. And having kids with a level-headed lady, if you're a young single man, that's my biggest piece of advice. No manic pixie dream girls. Don't do it. It's a bad idea. All right. So we're almost about 1:30 in time. So I'll let you all get running here. So any concluding thoughts? Anything you'd like to add for the audience here? Jeremy?
Well, yeah, don't be afraid to say sorry when you make a mistake, when you get it wrong. I think that goes a long way. It teaches your kids how to apologize when they do something that's not right. And just.
So I'm going to jump off that point real quickly here. That's another one of my parenting rules. Never lie to my children.
Right.
I'm not going to lie about Santa Claus. I'm not going to lie about Easter Bunny.
We never
Something
did that
like that.
either. We intentionally promised our kids we would never lie to them.
I'll never lie to my kids. Once you lie to someone and you're exposed as lying to them, then that trust is not going to be easily regained. And you're lying to them about the Easter Bunny. Maybe you're lying to them about Jesus.
Yep.
Never lie to your children. That's that. I'm glad you did. I'm glad you did bring that up, because that is one of my parenting rules.
Hmm.
Don't lie to kids.
Absolutely.
Joel, any concluding thoughts?
Yeah, my kids have never regretted us telling them the truth about Easter Bunny or the Tooth Fairy or Santa Claus. I tell my kids, I say, hey, if you lose a tooth and you put it under your pillow, you know what you're going to have in the morning? You're going to have a tooth under your pillow, because I don't pay you for your teeth, because the Tooth Fairy is not real. And but they've never regretted it. It dawned on me early on that if I want my kids to be godly and good people, I have to be that myself. Because, like the old saying, they're going to mimic you. They're going to do what you do, not what you say to do. And apologizing to your kids is one of the biggest things. If I do something wrong, then I need to model that I did something wrong and apologize. They're never going to apologize to me or somebody else if I don't do that myself, because that's just how we are. But something a friend of mine said, and I've taken it to heart, is that at the end of the day, if I had to make a choice between my kids being good or smart, I will always pick my kids to be good. Now, they can be both, but if I had to pick one, I want them to be good. I want them to follow Jesus. So I don't know. I try to live like that. Try to model that for my kids. People say, why are you kids interested in God? Or how do you get your kids to read the Bible? Well, I make that important in my own life. They do what mommy and daddy do. So marry a godly woman. That's really important. If you don't marry a godly woman, you're in for a whole lot of trouble.
Yeah, you found yours at like a church camp. What's it called? Youth with a Mission?
It was called Teen Mania. It's not a church camp, is it? But it's a ministry internship. Ministry internships are great places to find a good wife.
For fine ladies. Yeah. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Go on these trips, even if they're nonsense. It's like, we're going to go to Mexico and build houses for like a week, and then someone's going to live in our week-old house or something. Take those and send your kids on those. They can find ladies. That's actually what we worry about. It's very easy for ladies to find men, but vice versa, it's a little bit harder, because boys are a little bit more less assertive, younger in their lives, in securing those relationships. So we always hope for our young boys to go out and find these godly women who exist out there somewhere. But I think we had a good time tonight, and I think there's a lot of good parenting advice. We didn't get any counter narrative to some of the things we're saying, so maybe next time we could get someone to come in, maybe like a hippie parent or something, to try to give a little pushback. I think we're all very much in agreement. A little bit different parenting strategies, with free range versus a little bit more structured versus intermediate or something like that. But I guess time will tell if my kids turn out terrible or great. My money's on they're going to turn out pretty good. But thanks for coming tonight, and thanks for this beautiful interaction. I hope we could probably maybe do something like this again. And thanks to everyone else for coming in and asking questions and putting input as well. If anyone has any questions or comments, you can put that down below, or start a thread on the God is Open Facebook page. Thank you for listening.
Thanks, Chris.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you.